Good afternoon, everybody. As Achilles Saltas, the heart and soul of this forum, just said, I am going to pose questions to Jordan Bardella, who needs, I think, no introduction, in French, and you will have simultaneous translation. Bonjour, Monsieur Bardella.
Hello, Mr. Bardella. Welcome to this conference. You grew up, unlike many French leaders who graduated from the Grandes Écoles, you grew up in a neighborhood in the northern suburbs of Paris, Saint-Denis, and you were surrounded by immigrants, many of them North African, and that's where you grew up. What in this experience made you reach the conclusion that there were too many immigrants in France? How much do I have? A little bit. All right. First of all, thank you. Thank you for your invitation. I'd like to thank the organizers of this event and thanks to the New York Times team who are allowing me to explain myself, as I often say. And as you had the opportunity to point out in the introduction, we may not agree on everything I'm be able to say today. I think that it's the richness of democracy. We're lucky to live in Europe, on a continent, in states that allow very diverse opinions to confront each other, to express themselves. Here, in a place where democracy was born. I'm a French politician. I started politics very early, at the age of 16. You joined the National Rally. Yes, I joined this party, which is the National Rally, of which I'm the president today. You're right, I was born and I was raised in an area called Saint-Denis, a French department, which is still very much impacted by communitarism, by migratory flows, by the demographic weight of Islam. It is a statistical fact. I myself have an immigrant background, and I belong to a generation of French people with an immigrant background who, when they arrived in France, my parents came from Italy at the beginning of the 60s, made a very important, considerable effort, almost vital effort to become French. They learned a language, they integrated into society, respecting our institutions, our history, our country, respecting police officers, doctors, civil servants, and they wanted to become full-fledged French people. There are many French people with foreign roots, including African and Maghreb ancestry, who have made this effort and who are now full-fledged French people. My observation today is that the issue of immigration is a major issue. It is a major issue for French society. It is a major issue for European societies because demography makes history. We are a continent of 450 million inhabitants. Facing us are civilizations like Asia on our eastern front, which has 3 to 4 billion inhabitants, like Africa, which will go from 1 billion 200 million inhabitants to 2 billion 500 million inhabitants by 2050. So demography makes history. It is true that migratory flows, as we know them and as we have known them in France and in Europe, raise, first of all, concerns that are expressed through votes for parties like the National Rally or other political parties in Europe, some of which came to power, and which upset the major balance in our societies. I think that this question must be addressed in a very reasonable way, with a great deal of moderation, and I claim the right to be able to question immigration policy, integration policies, assimilation policies, without being systematically accused of being populist, xenophobic, or extreme right. So it's a major challenge. I face it with a lot of humility, a lot of serenity, because I do not want my country to disappear. I want France to be proud of itself, including its territory. If I understand you correctly, you are saying that this migratory flow, especially of Muslims, has not made the same effort that you yourself or the generation of other immigrants in France have made. And therefore, since they have not made this effort to become French, this is not acceptable. to you. Is that it? For the generations that are arriving, it is evident that the generations of French people who arrived in France from abroad, notably from our former colonies, including the Maghreb at the beginning of the 60s and 70s, have become full-fledged French people, and they themselves today express the concern of no longer recognizing their country. I remember a discussion I had one day with one of our compatriots. What do you mean the disappearance of France? France exists, she changes. Yes, France is changing, like many countries. The question is whether it is changing for the better or for the worse. And I remember a discussion I had when I started politics in a market handing out leaflets. I met a Frenchman of Algerian origin who told me, well, you know, the Islamism that I fled from my country, Algeria, in the early 90s, with a very aggressive militancy of GIA, finding it again in our country. And the concern that I express, and I express even more since October 7th, in a few days we're going to celebrate the sad anniversary of the October 7 massacres. It is the ideology, mass attack, of course, Hamas. That is why I say the sad anniversary. The ideology of Hamas is already on European soil and on French soil. France has been bereaved by multiple attacks, and today there is an ideology in France which is the Islamist ideology, which is expressed in a certain number of Arab countries by force, by arms, which does not want to be separated from French society, but wants to apply to the whole of French society all of its prohibitions, its vision of women, and incidentally its vision of society, which is sometimes contrary to our values, our codes, and our culture. And there are many French people of Muslim faith who respect our laws, who respect our culture, who respect secularism, and who do not wish to be assimilated to this ideology, which is beginning to take power in many neighborhoods in France. Le Pen's National Front was an anti-Semitic, racist party. He himself spoke of the Holocaust as a detail of history. He said that the Nazi regime was not particularly inhumane. A party that is quasi-fascist, let's say. And you insist that your party today has transformed itself, is no longer this racist party. It has become another party. But is it really so? When you are a party that many consider to be xenophobic, Islamophobic, and violently nationalistic. Have you really left this other party behind? I am the head of a political party that won 37% of the votes in France in the last legislative elections. I do not believe that a party in France can win 37% of the votes. That is to say, a result that no party in any Western democracy has managed to achieve or exceed by being racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic. But in Germany, a century ago, there was a party. Well, I feel nothing in common with it. The Nazi regime was probably the worst atrocity in the political expression of a regime in history. And we were among the first to condemn unambiguously the horrible attacks, the despicable attacks committed in Israel on October 7th. There are many of our compatriots of Jewish faith who today vote for the national rally precisely because they no longer feel safe in our country, and the rise of the Islamist ideology threatens their security, their freedom today. And once again, I was born in 1995, and I feel nothing in common with the part of the condemnable legacy of Jean-Marie Le Pen, for which he was convinced in court. I'm just saying one thing: all political parties have the right to evolve, and I have in front of me in France political movements like the Socialist Party. Remember that President François Mitterrand, who won in 1981, was elected president of the French Republic until 1995. He had received from the hands of Marshal Pétain the Francisque, that is to say, the highest distinction of the Vichy regime. he and his entourage and among his friends, there were people who had participated in collaboration. So I believe that history is complex and that the political archaeology that is sometimes expressed with regard to us is limited to the national rally. But I'm at the head of a political party that I consider to be a reasonable political party, which aims to bring together all French people, wherever they come from and whatever their religion, provided they express pride in being French. Is it a xenophobic party? No, it is not a xenophobic party. I claim the right and freedom to criticize immigration policy without being accused of being xenophobic. I do not like excesses, insults, stigmatization, the fact of singling out people. On the other hand, my role today in a country where 60 to 70% of French people consider that we have welcomed too many immigrants and that the immigration today is disrupting the major balances of our society, well, my duty is to provide solutions to all these people and to all of our compatriots who, like many European people, express the wish to see their identity, their culture, their borders being protected. Patriotism is not the rejection of the others. It is an act of love for one's nation, for the national community, and for one's own country. It is true that this act of love that I made, that my family made when we arrived from Italy in the 60s, it is something that many immigrants, many generations of immigrants have made, but it is true that many generations today do not do it, and that's a shame. You often say that immigration France is synonymous with violence, a bit like Donald Trump announced in his 2015 campaign when he said that all Mexicans en bloc were rapists. Is this fair? Is this really sustainable as an argument? Is Donald Trump's entire argument actually your argument? That is, immigration equals violence, equals insecurity, equals destabilized society. Well, first of all, I'm not Donald Trump's lawyer. I'm not Mr. Trump's lawyer. I think he's old enough to defend himself and to stand by his statements. It is true that some of it, not all delinquency, not all criminality, I do not like generalizations, but it is true that some of the delinquency, the criminality in France is linked to our inability to control our migratory flows. Today, in transports, for instance, in Paris, in the Paris metro, 93% of thefts and 63% of sexual assaults are committed by foreigners. These are not my figures, these are the figures of the Ministry of the Interior. Anyone can check, and I do not like this blindness, this sleepwalking, which consists in turning a blind eye to reality. I say what I see, and I also demand pragmatism and the possibility of responding not to an ideology, but to facts. Obviously, this does not mean that all foreigners commit crimes and offenses, fortunately for us, but it is now a statistical fact that the inability to control migratory flows is responsible for an increase in delinquency and criminality in many territories. There are many French people today who make this link. So I think that we will succeed in restoring security, in restoring order in our societies, if we are able to control immigration. I do not believe it is extremist to make this observation. But once again, I do not like generalizations. I do not put everyone in the same bag. Are you in favor of the deportation of certain immigrants who are present in France? No, I do not use the term deportation. I know it's an Anglicism, but it's a term, deportation, which has a very particular connotation for us. We talk about expulsion. I'm actually in favor. You prefer expulsion? Yes, in France we use the term expulsion because the term deportation relates to World War II. I know that in English you use the term deportation. Nevertheless, in France you had a lot of Jews who went to the death camps. Yes, but it has not much to do with immigration policy today. Yes, but you're talking about expulsion. There is some kind of a link. Well, when you're a foreigner, well, if tomorrow you organize a dinner at your place, and the people who come to dine at your place behave badly, start breaking glasses, are insulting, well, you're not going to invite them again. But the country, it is the same. I start from the principle that when we go to a country, when a country welcomes us, we respect its culture, we respect its way of life, and above all, we respect its laws. Now, I actually think that when you're a foreigner in a country and you commit a crime or an offense, well, after you have served your sentence, you must be sent back to your country. Now, is this extremist to say that? So, how many people are you planning to deport? Well, today in France, according to official figures, well, if you come to power, obviously, according to official figures, we have in France today 600,000 people, according to the Ministry of the Interior, who are illegally on French soil. I think that you cannot be welcomed in a country when you are there illegally. You cannot violate the law of a territory, because I'm very attached to the rule of law. You cannot violate the law of a community, of a country, of a nation, and then be able to have rights or obtain benefits from the very same state. So our inability today to control migratory flows weighs on our society, weighs on public accounts. And there was another tragedy last week in Paris that has been in the headlines for 7 days now. It is the death, the murder of a 19-year-old woman who was murdered on her way home from school, on her way home from university in the Bois de Boulogne. She was murdered by an illegal alien who had what we call an obligation to leave the French territory. That is to say, he should have been expelled, and the state did not expel him. And that had very serious and irreversible consequences, since it led to the death of one of our compatriots. So I want to re-establish the authority of the state in my country, and I see two fundamental ideas that are a bit the ideas at the origin of General de Gaulle's political doctrine: order and movement. Order is obviously security, the protection of our borders. Movement is the step forward towards the great conquests of the 21st century, which are at the same time economy, artificial intelligence, power, and demography. Are you saying that General de Gaulle would have approved of the national rally? I would not have this pretension. I would not have this pretension, because General de Gaulle belongs to all the French people. There is a dam against your party, because it was thought to be synonymous with a return to a terrible chapter in French history, the history of Vichy. Now, this dam has fallen, but what are you going to bring to your country? For me, France during World War II was not in Vichy. It was in London with General de Gaulle. But she was also in Vichy. I recognize the legitimacy of General de Gaulle insofar he carried this very French spirit of freedom, French democracy from London. But I mean, we are not going to remain stuck in the past. And what interests me are the challenges of my generation in the 21st century, and I prefer to look towards 2030 rather than look back to 1930. You're 29 years old. Yes, I just turned 29. You're young. During the legislative campaign, it was rather obvious that you planned to arrive at Matignon. You spoke about your program as if you were already at Matignon. Were you disappointed not to be there? And what conclusions you draw from the legislative elections that in the end blocked your party's passage to power? We have a bit of feeling, and I'm very happy to be here at the Forum for Democracy, in order to say that in France, to govern, you have to have lost the elections. We have reached a crazy situation. The political party that comes out on top has nothing. We are excluded from everything. We do not even have a vice president of the National Assembly, and the political party that comes last governs. We have arrived today in a democratic functioning in France were, in order to prevent us, a very original conception of democracy, in order to prevent us from implementing our program. Well, we came on top in the legislative elections with 11 million votes, a considerable number of votes. We came out on top in terms of votes, and yet the alliance between Emmanuel Macron and the far left prevents us from having the government and prevents us from having a majority in the National Assembly. So we have a government today that is without democratic legitimacy, and I believe will not last very long. How long? I don't know, a few months, maybe. What is clear is that nothing today in France can be done without us, and we will try to have as many of our texts as possible adopted by the National Assembly. And the day there is a blockage, well, we will censure the government. Was I disappointed? Yes. When you start, when you're a candidate in an election, you obviously want to win it. But you're 29, you can wait. Obviously, I have also time, but I think that France no longer has the time. And the fight that we are leading with Marine Le Pen in France, we're not doing it for ourselves. Do you see yourself at Matignon one day? I see myself where I'll be useful. It is the French people who must say where they see me and whether they do not see me in power. I think that our worst enemy is time. There you have it. France is in a budgetary, security and democratic situation that is extremely worrying. I'm young, yet I'm extremely envious when I see our American partners recording 3% growth and France struggling to reach 0.2 or 0.3 growth. I'm very young and very envious when I see in the United States plenty of cheap energy for the industry, and in our case very expensive energy for our companies and our compatriots because of the ideology and the race for ever more drastic environmental standards, both at French and the European level. And I try to return in France to very simple ideas: democracy, security, fraternity between the French, growth, and conquest towards the great challenges of the 21st century. So I have the time, but perhaps my country, France, has less time than I have. You can bring down the government whenever you want. You have 142 seats. With the left, you have 335, I think, in an assembly of 577. So the moment when you deem that Prime Minister Barnier is not doing his job well, or that the laws are not the laws that are a priority for your party, notably the laws on immigration, you bring down the government. And there will be no leadership for a year. And you can do that repeatedly. Do you intend to bring down the government anytime soon? The characteristic of a strategy is that it is not to be revealed. So I'm not going to reveal to you what our strategic intentions are with regard to the government. When the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, received us at the end of August, we had to find a Prime Minister for France. I told him that we were not going to play the blockage. We had to find a Prime Minister for the country, and even if the government did not last long, we had to move forward. But I also told him that I had a red line. This red line was for the new Prime Minister to respect the voters of the National Rally, because I'm tired of our voters always being considered second-class voters. Our voters pay taxes, our voters respect the law, our voters have the same rights as all other French voters, and consequently they have the right to be represented and defended. And when people talk about cordon sanitaire, barrier to the National Rally must not govern or preside over France. Well, it is not us that they are blocking. It is the French. It is 1 million of French people who are demanding a change in politics and who are also demanding to reconnect with this French pride. So on behalf of these people, what laws do you want to see on immigration and possibly on taxes? I think that there are two elements of urgency today. In politics, we always have to distinguish between something that is urgent, something that is important. For me, today, what is important is purchasing power and security. On purchasing power, we are defending a reduction in taxes on fuel and electricity, because there are millions of French people in our country today who are very much worried about inflation, about the high cost of living. It has become a major issue and one of the major concerns of the French people. So we are in favor of a targeted reduction in taxes, and we are in favor of a major security law, because the other major concern of the French is security. And well, real quick, an anecdote. A few days ago, I had the opportunity to go to New York for the UN summit, the summit on the future organized by the United Nations. In one single day, I took 3 taxis. I was going to professional meetings. Let me make this quite clear, because I don't want people to say that politicians take taxes, etc. So I took 3 cabs in New York, and the 3 cab drivers asked me, where are you from, what do you do in France, etc. I replied, I come from Paris, and 3 of them said, whoa, Paris, and then went on. Well, a friend of mine has been to Paris and had a bad experience. He was attacked, his wallet was stolen, his mobile phone was stolen. It was terrible. Where these immigrants, but I just quote, I was not there, but the fact that the image of my country, international, is the image of insecurity. Well, you say, but what would be the point of the law? Well, you say we've never seen that, but believe me, we talked about it yesterday. Insecurity, you look at the concerns of the French, but what would be the vote that would correct that? Well, as I said, it's insecurity and purchasing power. What will rectify this? I'm campaigning to toughen sentences today. Toughen immigration laws tomorrow? Yes, you're asking me for a tangible measure. On criminal policy, I would like to see tougher sentences. Today, a large proportion of delinquency and criminality in France is committed by minors. I think that we need to toughen sanctions, toughen sentences. For 30 years in France, we have been trapped in a culture of excuses. In the Netherlands, they have set up a system of incarceration for minors. Obviously, minors are not put in prison, not put in jail. They are put in closed educational centers. And sentences are short and immediate. Well, that prevents repeat offenses, and they had very significant results. So I come back to simple things. Security, purchasing power, the possibility of heating your house and moving around without going broke, democracy, protecting our identity. These are, for me, simple issues, common sense issues, and issues that speak to a majority of French people, because they are the concern of a majority of French people. Mr. Bardella, are you a candidate for the presidency of the Republic in 2027? No, I hope we can return to the polls in legislative elections before 2027. In a few months? I hope so, because I think that this government will not last until 2027. In any case, we are preparing ourselves, and I think that we will end up winning, because it is often said that politics go in waves, and I believe that the wave that carried us and that carries us in 2024 is a very powerful wave. And I hope for my country that we will be able to implement. Well, many French men and women I spoke to told me, no, Ms. Le Pen, no. She's lost too many times. She will lose again. What we need is Jordan Bardella for the Élysée in 2027. Are you ready for it or not? Well, I could give you examples of French people who told me the very opposite. You are too young. Our natural candidate is Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen has experience today because she was a candidate at presidential elections 3 times. And she lost 3 times. Well, politics is a way of the cross in France, and I believe that Marine Le Pen can be a president of the Republic. In any case, I'm her first supporter. I always have been, and there is between us a complementarity and above all a friendship that is very strong, and I know what I owe to her. There are friendships that end badly, Well, we will show you that even in this subject we are a little different from others. She called you her lion cub. Then you became her lion. It's a bit ambiguous. Well, she said, like Aristotle, that you are a political animal. What is a political animal for you? Are you a political animal? Well, I don't know. It is you, observers, who write, who describe. Not everyone at your age gets to be where you are. I don't have an ordinary life when you're 29. Well, I was elected as a member of the European Parliament at 23, and politics swallowed me up. It's a real sacrifice today to be in frontline politics in France because it's difficult, it's violent, because you take hits. But for me, it's passion, and maybe it's a vocation. In any case, I fight so that my ideas come to power. I fight to help my country get better. I think, and I do apologize to our American friends, but I think that we have the most beautiful country in the world, and you only have to go abroad to realize how much the voice of France is heard, how the voice of France carries weight, and I don't want this voice to disappear. Well, you mentioned the European Parliament. Precisely concerning the European Parliament, there is a trial that has just started. Mrs. Le Pen and your political group are accused of embezzlement, and this could eventually lead to the conviction of Mrs. Le Pen. And there are even sentences, I believe, up to 10 years for this if she is found guilty. How do you see all this? Well, first of all movements, all political blocs, all political camps in France are concerned by this procedure. The left is concerned, worried. The presidential majority, or rather the former presidential majority, is concerned. We are concerned. And indeed, today the trial opens. It is a very complex case, but the European Parliament has accused our parliamentary assistants of doing politics. It's no question of fictitious employment, there is no question of personal enrichment. There is simply a difference in the assessment of the role of parliamentary assistants. We are going to demonstrate our good faith, but I do not want to believe that a few months, a few years before the presidential election, judges will decide to make Marine Le Pen ineligible. In any case, it's a very complex case, and Marine Le Pen is approaching it in a very combative way. This is quite obvious since there is an accusation. Once again, the left is concerned, the former presidential majority of Emmanuel Macron is concerned, we are concerned. There's a difference of appreciation between France and the European Parliament on the nature of the work of parliamentary assistants. But we will obviously continue to do politics during this period, because I do not want our activities to be limited to this trial for 3 months. So we have prepared with our lawyers lines. Marine Le Pen obviously will lead the legal battle in this trial, and I think that in the end we will win. Are you convinced that President Macron will make it to 2027? No. No? Why? Well, let us be honest. No one could have imagined or envisaged the dissolution of the National Assembly after a victory in the elections, perhaps apart from myself, because I demanded it throughout the year 24, saying that if I was in the lead, was it an act of madness? I don't know if it was an act of madness. I think that it is never madness to return to the polls. There you go. Well, I'll quote General de Gaulle, who said that the Supreme Court in a democracy is the people, and it is never madness to return to the people. Now, it is clear that our country is in a very difficult economic and social situation. The government that runs the country has no majority, no democratic legitimacy, and therefore it is not strange to think that if the budget should not be voted in the next few months, if the blockage should persist, the President of the Republic will have to leave. But he is very keen to be president until 2027. Do you want him to leave? I'm not for disorder, I'm not for chaos. We have institutions that work rather well. Now, dissolution is a strong act, and I think that there can be new legislative elections to redetermine a new majority in the country by the next presidential elections. In any case, we will work, we will be ready, and we will come back even better than last time. the ideal scenario for your party in 2027 would be Mrs. Le Pen, or possibly yourself, against Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the two extremes. Then you would be more confident of winning rather than against the center. No, it's not the two extremes. It is reason versus the extremes. You are not extremist as a party? No way. Are you a right-wing or far-right party? Neither. What are you then? I think we are the camp of reason in a political landscape, and we are the defenders of a form of common sense as well. The camp of nationalism. I think that the divided structure of France, in any case, the one I'm trying to outline, which will structure us in coming years, is a confrontation between the supporters of power, the supporters of a power of France and Europe, those who think that we still have an identity, a sovereignty, an industry, an economy, a diplomacy to structure and defend and promote, and on the other side, the supporters of renunciation. And the history of France is a permanent confrontation between those who said no and those who accommodated or accepted the decline of France. France today is on the brink of decline, and I say no. It is Mr. Macron who always talks about going strong, but he does not do it. You're telling me, I'm going to tell you, Emmanuel Macron is a man of the past, because a man of the past, he's very much present. When all the great powers of the world, all the great economic powers of the world, from the United States to China, are economic patriots, defend their domestic markets, defend their diplomacy, control their borders and their immigration. And the European Union is doing the exact opposite, locked in a kind of commercial naivety. Look, when the United States is threatened by dumping, is threatened with unfair competition, Chinese vehicles, it is no longer custom duties at 25%, but at 100%. When naive Europe is threatened by Chinese electric vehicles, it imposes custom duties at 10%. So the model that Emmanuel Macron defends is a model of the past, and there is no great power that will succeed in globalization, that succeeds today in globalization, without being proud of itself. And what I want to do in France and in Europe is what works everywhere else in the world. So there is in my political software realpolitik and the principle of reality. I look at what is being done around us, and I wanted the good recipes of that work elsewhere to be applied in France, and I'm facing people who are ideologues. Don't you think you underestimate your country, France? The Olympics were a French triumph. Well, where did you hear that I underestimate my country? On the contrary, you describe a country in decline, divided between Muslims and non-Muslims. No, it is you who said that. Well, yes, I have a country that is the most indebted in the Eurozone. 3.2 trillion euros debt. I have a country whose nuclear power, the nuclear park, has allowed for a long time to have a cheap electricity in the service of our industry's competitiveness, which, because of European rules, we are prevented from taking advantage of this competitiveness. And above all, I'm involved in politics in a country, France, whose default is not to love itself enough. There you go. We saw during the Olympic Games that when France is moved, when France is united, it is still capable of genius, the French genius, and it is capable of offering its talents and showing the product of its culture and its historical and sports power to the world. So when I tell you Aya Nakamura is part of this genius, when I tell you Aya Nakamura, is she part of this genius or not? I'm not going to tell you otherwise. She's the most listened to French woman in the world. Well, yes, she is a French Malian. I don't know, when you talk about the disappearance of France, it's a France that has changed ultimately, France that has diverse populations. I think you are attributing to me ideas that are not mine. I wouldn't want to do that. And I think that the tragedy of France is that France does not love itself enough. And I'm always very unhappy when I travel abroad because I see that in all countries people are very proud of their country, are very proud of their nation, are very proud of their culture. In the United States, they're very proud of their flag. It is only in France where sometimes we do not want to say that we are proud to be French. And I claim the right and the pride of being French because I think that we have the most beautiful country in the world, and I think that we can be heard everywhere throughout the world. Do you wish Donald Trump to win in the United States? I was waiting for the question. I'll tell you. Well, here it is. I formulated it. I think that I cannot predict what's going to happen in the United States, and I think that viewed from the outside, both of them, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, they both have the possibility of winning. I think that Donald Trump's victory would be an opportunity for France to reconnect with sovereignty, autonomy, and independence. Because if Donald Trump actually decides to engage in a form of isolation, to disengage military from Europe, it must be an opportunity and a chance for France to regain its sovereignty. Since the outbreak of the war in the Ukraine, since Russia's aggression, the violation of the Ukraine's territorial sovereignty by Russia, 80% of military budget increases in all EU member states have been made to the benefit of foreign companies, largely American companies. I want us to find again the means of our independence, the means of our power, and I think that precisely the role of France in the world is or must be a balancing power between the East and the West. Well, naturally, the United States are historical partners, and I believe that the merit of Donald Trump, in light of some of Joe Biden's decisions, is to have awakened the Republican Party and to have provoked a Western surge in the face of China, and today in the face of threats that threatening us all, threatening our sovereignty, China, Iran, and so on. So if Donald Trump was eventually to withdraw the U.S. from NATO, would that be a positive thing for you? Because it would create in France a need to be an independent power, right? And even for Europe. So you're in favor. I am not in favor or not in favor. I will tell you, I'm not an American citizen. I do not have the knowledge you have of American political life. I look at what my interests are as a Frenchman. And in 2016, I preferred Trump to Clinton because Trump was, for instance, opposed to TAFTA, the Transatlantic Trade Alliance Treaty with Europe. And precisely this very TAFTA was contrary to my interest. It was contrary to our interest. Now, it is true also that when Donald Trump raises taxes on wine imports, well, we cannot say that this is in favor of the French economy. Well, we'll finish soon. Your party in the European Parliament, let's go back to that. Your party voted against independence and sovereignty of Ukraine in 2021 and has long favored President Putin. Have you changed your mind? I will give you an answer that I have already given, but I think that your question presupposes something that does not correspond to what I say and what I think. A vote is a vote. Yes, I support Ukraine because I think that when you are a sovereignist in one country and a patriot in one country, you must be a sovereignist in all the countries of the world. And my generation, I was born in 95, my generation discovered war 3 hours by plane from Paris. So it is true. I said it and I stand by these words. There was for a long time in France, and I find it regrettable that only my political party is put on trial. There was a collective naivety with regard to the ambitions and intentions of Vladimir Putin. Well, Vladimir Putin started the war and began aggression against the Ukraine. President Zelensky himself did not believe a few days earlier in the veracity of a violation of the current borders of the Ukraine by Russia. So I'm in favor of support for Ukraine, military support, support in terms of defense equipment. Simply, I have red lines, and I do not want us to enter into an escalation with Russia, because we are France, and France is a nuclear power. However, when the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, puts on the table the possibility of sending troops and ground soldiers to the Ukraine, well, I'm against it, because I think that because we are Europeans, we do know the meaning of the word escalation in history, and it is never good. In the extremely troubled times that our country experiences, for two countries that have nuclear power to face each other. Now, Russia is a multidimensional threat to Europe and to France, and we're obviously going to have to deal with it. And as I was saying to you, we had the opportunity to talk about it together. France's voice no longer carries on the international scene. I remember that in 2008, President Sarkozy obtained from President Putin the partial withdrawal of Russian troops from Georgia. In 2014, François Hollande, alongside Chancellor Merkel, obtained the Minsk agreements. Emmanuel Macron went to Moscow before the outbreak of the war. He was not able to obtain a diplomatic breakthrough with President Putin because France's voice no longer carries, and we are too often assimilated to a global voice that would be the voice of the European Union. So once again, I'm doing politics on reality. It's clear that Russia is today contesting a number of French interests in our overseas territories. For instance, in Africa, or areas of historical interest. For me, every time that France's interests decline in Africa, those of Russia advance. In France, there is what we call Bardella mania. What you call Bardella mania. No, a lot of people talk about Bardella mania. You are very much present on TikTok. You are always very well dressed, elegant. We see your Italian roots and all that. People talk about the sweets you like, the chewing gum, I don't know what. How can you explain this Bardella mania? How come you have this hold on at least part of French people? But that's your job, not mine. No, but I would like to know how you see all this. Are you flattered? I claim to be close to the French people. I think that politics has moved away from the people and locked itself away in offices. Sometimes we make decisions that are not understood on the ground because politicians are out of step with the lives of our compatriots. And it is certain that I feel at home among the French. I have always been one of them because, as you mentioned, I did not attend the Grandes Écoles. Is there too much ENA in French politics? I do not know if there is too much ENA in French politics. In any case, I do not like the simplicity of speaking ill of the ENA or those who graduated from it, speaking ill of the elites, etc. What is certain is that there is a disconnection today, a distance between the people who make the decision in Paris and what the French experience on a daily basis. As for the European Parliament, we see the production of standards every day, administrative paperwork for our companies, our industries, our farmers, and the people on the ground keep saying, well, we can't cope anymore because we spend way too much time, too many hours a week filling out paperwork. So we feel that there is this disconnection, this distancing, and what I try to do, very modestly, is to bring politics closer to the French and to ensure that the French take back ownership of politics, because by taking back ownership of politics, they also take back ownership of their future, their daily lives. You know, Chateaubriand said that to be the man of your country, you have to be a man of your time. And I try to be a man of my time. Think I am one. evidence and by nature, because I started politics very early, and I have never forgotten the difficulties that were mine and those of my family when I was young. A family that came from elsewhere, that integrated, that worked hard, that raised me on a small salary in a territory affected by violence. And the sense of urgency that brought me to politics, I believe, is something that I have not lost. One last question. Many of the people you say have no place in France. People, well, some of them should leave. You're the one who says that. Anyway, they came with the same hopes as your family. They came because they were looking for a better life. I think they often encountered racism in France, but they are trying to find a way to move forward in life. And it sometimes seems that you have forgotten your own roots. Meaning what? Well, meaning that your family came with the same hopes that many immigrants have for a new life. And as an American, I can speak of this because that is what brought tens of millions of people to America to start lives again. And I think that many immigrants in France are like that. They don't want to make France disappear. They simply wanted to find a way to live better. Well, first of all, I think that once again, you're granting me a subliminal thought that is not mine, according to which I would ask people to leave the country, to go away, telling them that you're not welcome, etc. I think that France will always remain open to people who come to France, goodwill, who come to France in order to work, and I think that all this seems to me to be a common sense. There are many French people who are from immigrant backgrounds who vote for the National Rally and vote for the National Rally because they understand perfectly well that the heart of our project is patriotism and the nation, and that one can perfectly well come from another country, from another culture, and be happy in France, because France is precisely one of this country. Excuse me, but I formally reject the idea that the French state is racist. I think that France, well, some French people are. Racism exists in all societies, but I'm sorry, France is the country that has been the most generous towards people who have come from abroad. In France, we have free education, we have free health care. Sometimes when we talk to our American friends, we say, well, health care is free here. Only in France, where when you arrive from abroad, even if you do not come legally, France offers you the whole range of free health care. So we have a country that is wonderful, but assimilation, a word that I prefer to integration, assimilation is not come as you are, but become what we are. And so I start from the principle that when you arrive in a country, when you go to a country, you respect its way of life, you respect its laws, you respect the women's right, and I do not believe that in this way of thinking that I find perfectly healthy, there is a form of rejection or a form of xenophobia. It hurt me a lot when last year, we were talking about it yesterday, during the riots that hit France for 2 months last summer, people who are second or third generation immigrants started attacking schools, attacking public buildings, attacking libraries. Now, what does that have to do with racism that supposedly the state displayed all these years? When we complain about racism, why do we have to attack a library? All that is unacceptable, and so I think we need to put some order, and as we say in France, we need to put the church in the middle of the village, that is to say, to show some common sense. The riots followed the death of a 17-year-old North African boy who was shot point-blank range by a police officer. The investigation completely exonerated the police officer. When you are a police officer in a French suburb and a car speeds toward you, I don't know what you should do, but suburb of Neuilly, It did not happen since Saint-Denis. Well, it was Nanterre. Well, a very, very last questions, because you have given us much more time than expected. There's a gentleman who was to ask a question there, but you have said several times that France is a beautiful country, probably the most beautiful country of the world. So Mr. Bardella, why are so many French people grumbling? Well, you have to understand that the French are aware that we have a very beautiful country, but you, and I say you because I live in France every day, but you from the outside, you have to understand that many of our compatriots are going through difficult times because life is expensive, because there are fewer and fewer doctors, especially in rural areas in our countryside, because the political power is no longer listening to our compatriots, because the security situation is deteriorating, because there are many people who no longer recognize the country in which they grew up. And the fractures in France are developing, are becoming more pronounced over time. And so there is an anger that is legitimate. And I tell you, above these difficulties, there is something that is stronger, the French soul, a soul that has always made us one of the most followed nations in the world. France is the oldest nation in the world. It has existed since the baptism of Clovis. And I try to tell the French people that what they are experiencing is not fate, is not inevitable, that is, it is a consequence of political choices. But by changing the policies, we can improve their daily life, we can bring a little happiness back to this country, which for me, indeed, is the most beautiful country in the world. But in August, all the French go to the seaside and the mountain, and they stop grumbling. Not all the French people, the French people, go less and less on holiday because they have less and less opportunity to make ends meet. And the fight we are waging is primarily for all these French people, the people of France, the working France, the France that gets up early and can no longer make a living from its work. Mr. Bardella, there are people who want to ask questions. Do you agree? Of course. Do you have time?
Do we still have time?
Maybe I can take one question?
Okay.
Two questions. Okay. There is a gentleman there standing up and then the lady. Maybe I can take both at the same time and I can answer them both.
Thank you very much. I listened to you very carefully, and I couldn't help but feel that you're describing a vision for France, which is like having your cake and eating it. So, for example, you said you would impose higher tariffs on goods from around the world, but you wouldn't want other countries to impose tariffs on French products. You admire American economic growth, which is in big part fueled by immigrant-based population growth, but you don't want immigration in your country. You also want a France which is strong in the world, but you don't want the world to be inside France. How do you resolve these contradictions, and how does that impact on whether your vision for France is actually realizable?
Okay. Can you wait 1 minute? Wait.
You admire American growth, but growth is largely due to immigration. So the gentleman, our friend here, says that yet you're full of contradictions. I take both questions and answer afterwards. Hello, my name is Calypso. My question comes from a French woman of Greek, German, and Spanish origin, so with 3 non-French grandparents. Would have been targeted by you in the elections because you would have banned me from certain security-related jobs. But you might tell me that my grandparents were good white foreigners, like your own Italian parents. But then, why do you think that almost two-thirds of the French people in the last elections in July convinced themselves and comforted themselves in a Republican camp which consisted of people very much on the left voting for people very much on the right, and people very much on the right voting for people very much on the left, and for both of them withdrawing in favor. Almost two-thirds of French people. What was going on in their minds? For us, all those who were in this Republican camp, was there not a kind of moral anger, I would almost say a certain shame, that a certain image of France, a certain image of France could be projected to the world? The France that you spoke about, that must be saved, a France that is not there just like that, as some kind of psychological object, a France that politicians strongly influence with their words, a France where we repeat in every anecdote, where there may be a foreigner, maybe not, that it is the invasion, a foreign tsunami. We end up infiltrating in people's minds. Do you understand these two-thirds of French people who created this Republican front against you? Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. All right, I will answer in order. I have the impression that you have an obsession. Whom do you answer first? I will answer somewhat generally. I have the impression that you have an obsession with immigration foreigners. Since the beginning of this interview, you have been talking to me about whites, foreigners, migrants, xenophobia. You will note that these are terms that I have not used. I'm simply claiming the possibility of confronting the question of immigration without being accused of being racist, xenophobic, etc. Well, let's start perhaps on contradictions. Obviously, I will tell you that I do not see any contradiction in the speech that is mine, but you are free to interpret it in that way. I do not see any contradiction on the economic level. That is to say, there is on the one side the question of custom duties, and when our industries, our companies, our factories are victims of unfair competition, we can perfectly well put in place custom duties and increase the external tariff. I'm simply asking to do at the borders of the common market, at the borders of the European Union, what all the great powers do and what the United States of America does. I would only like to point out the American contradiction, which consists in professing liberalism and ultra-liberalism for everyone, but doing the exact opposite. But actually, the Americans are right, because they protect their domestic market and they defend their interests. The opening for public procurement has a rate of 28% in the US, 30% in Japan, and 80% in Europe. And I note that there is indeed an anomaly and a paradox compared to the rest of the world. The workforce. In principle, I am in favor of controlling immigration, but we have been forced in a certain number of sectors to resort to economic immigration because we did not have the jobs in France. For a very long time, we closed the possibility of training doctors in France, and now we're obliged to go and look for doctors abroad. We have underinvested in the nuclear sectors, and today we're obliged to go and look for welders in the United States in order to operate a nuclear park. Look at Switzerland. Switzerland has 25% foreigners. And out of this 25% of foreigners, there are no problems of security tensions or social tensions in Switzerland because there are 80% Europeans. What hurts me today, obviously, the subject of immigration, but there is also the subject of emigration, the departure each year of 200,000 young French people who cannot find a way to live and work in their country, in France, and who are forced to go abroad. We have these two subjects to deal with. And to answer you, no, I do not see any contradiction there. But I claim above all the right of each people to decide what is good for them. If the American people consider that the American nation must welcome a lot of immigrants, well, that is democracy. But it works also the other way. And when we have a democracy, when 60-70% of a country in polls, opinion studies, surveys say that they want less immigration, well, then we must listen to what the people in question says. So no, I do not see any contradiction. As to dual citizenship or dual nationals, well, you see, here too I'm being criticized for things that do not correspond to what I defend and what I really think. I'm not against dual citizenship. I never said that I would question dual citizenship. I simply said that we had to be extremely careful and we had to control better the most strategic posts in the state. And I gave an example. I said, in a period we're living, can you imagine a Franco-Russian at the head of a nuclear power station? Obviously, the answer is no. Can you imagine a Franco-Chinese at the head of the French secret services? Well, again, the answer is no. So, all of this, once again, is common sense, and I do not see any contradiction. I'm often criticized of dwelling into origins, etc. The person asking a question, which you were kind enough to read, talks about her white great-grandparents. I never talked about race, origins. Once again, putting in my things in my head, in my mouth, that do not correspond to what I think. What is true is that I believe that there are still many of our compatriots who have fears when thinking about us, who have fears in good faith. There are French people from immigrant backgrounds who, in good faith, think that if we are to come to power in France today, we will call into question their rights, we will call into question their freedom. And I believe we have seen it today. Yes, we have made some blunders, I admit it, but I'm attributing intentions that are not mine. And I like a fight because that is democracy, but I simply say, fight me on what I think, on what I say, and not on remarks, statements that are attributed to me. In this particular case, I'm not against dual citizenship, and I do not wish to call dual citizenship into question. Well, Mr. Bardella, I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Cohen.